Welcome to Parenting Off Script, the podcast that dives deep into the beautifully complex world of special educational needs and disabilities, or SEND parenting. I'm Kate Gresswell-Pettitt, your host. If you're raising a child with additional needs, or perhaps navigating parenthood while managing your own additional needs, you know that the rule book was thrown out long ago. You're not following a general guide, you are truly parenting off script. Join me each week as I speak to incredible parents, advocates and experts from all walks of life. We'll share the real stories, the unexpected challenges, the hard-won victories and the profound joys that come when you embrace a different way of parenting in the 21st century. So take a deep breath, grab your favourite drink and let's get started. So today I wanted to invite my co-parent onto the podcast with us.
Thank you for having me in this safe space you've created. Yeah, so I'm Arlen, and I think this is a fascinating subject. I think it's a really really important one to kind of delve into and talk about. And I think one of the really interesting things about this is when you're parenting a neurodivergent child, you often look back on your own experiences, and I think that's something that for me was really eye-opening. You start to really interrogate the world and how it works and how people interact with it, and then learn quite a lot about yourself. And that's certainly my experience. And yeah, I think for me it's been kind of really eye-opening and really kind of altered my perception on some of the experiences I've had kind of earlier in my life. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation and also seeing you in full presenting mode.
That doesn't make it awkward at all. Thanks. So let's give a bit of background on kind of our neurodivergent parenting journey. So our eldest, who is 6 now, we had him in 2019. I think it's fair to say we were pretty clueless. None of our friends at the time had kids. We didn't have any kind of young children in our lives at all, really. And it was a very smooth pregnancy, horrific birth. And then I think we both really struggled with those early days, didn't we? We both our mental health, I think, it fell to pieces, I think is the only way to describe it. And I, from quite early on in our son's life, felt like something was different about him, even in infancy, even when I would see other babies in the baby classes and all of that. Thought, oh, that's interesting. He was late to a lot of his milestones. However, COVID then hit just before he turned a year old. So suddenly we weren't sort of seeing other kids, and you don't really have that comparison point. And then when things started reopening again, he was a toddler and he started nursery. And I think that's when a lot of his particularly social and communication challenges became really, really evident, because he would have meltdowns, which you expect with any toddler, but they were very extreme. And he would lash out, wouldn't he, at the people around him. And I think in terms of how we discovered our own neurodivergence, I think it came a little bit later. It came especially when he started school and we were getting closer to, actually, there's probably autism, ADHD. We know that he's got sensory processing disorder. He's got attachment disorder, quite a few things. I knew that quite early on, but I think you came a little bit later to it. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to sort of what was your experience of that? What was your thinking in those early days? And then as we started getting closer and closer to additional support for him.
When you first become a parent, it's such a significant change in your life. And I think there's a big thing there around the kind of birthing parent and the non-birthing parent and their experience of pregnancy and becoming a parent. Because I think for you'd had a kind of 9-month kind of period where you were really conscious of the world changing, and you were growing a human, and you were doing all of the work. And for you, it was a real thing a long time before it was a real thing for me. I was obviously really kind of conscious of you and supporting you through pregnancy, but I didn't feel like a parent until he came into the world. And I think probably for you, you were thinking about it, you were processing it, you were absorbing all the information far earlier than I was. And I think that's probably quite a common divide.
Yeah. Heywood, did you find anything similar when you had your daughter?
Yeah, it was definitely the same kind of setup.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Bella and Briggy were like one.
Yeah.
They were connected, and not that I took a back seat, but you're forced into a backseat position, really, because the baby is so dependent on the mum. It was more about supporting the mother than the baby.
Yeah.
It felt like, and that was the role that I kind of lent into.
Yeah.
And then as Bella grew up, it was like she was more interested in me.
Yeah.
But I was always very intentional to still try and spend time with her, even when she was teeny.
Yeah.
You know,
to create that bond.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's really interesting. Like, because my recollection of that period is very similar. That I was focused on supporting you to support him, and particularly as, like you said, just had a difficult birth, and then your mental health was really difficult afterwards for quite a period of time as well. So it was like, that was my focus, was let's make sure that you're okay, and that then helps him be okay. But I took shared parental leave, so you had 6 months of
6 months on mat leave,
and then I had 3 months, and that was a really conscious decision on my part to try and form that bond fairly early.
Yeah,
and that was because I thought, I wanted to, and I thought it was really important, and I was really conscious of wanting to be present and wanting to understand and wanting to be part of that initial kind of growth and getting into the world phase, because I think if a lot of fathers miss that,
I think they underestimate how important it is, because if the baby doesn't seem interested, it must mean that they don't need you, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've spoken to friends where they've been like, "Oh, I'll get more involved when they can do stuff," and it's like, but they're, those couple of years at the beginning, they're developing so much, but it's all in here, so you should have your face in front of them as much as you can.
Yeah,
I think.
And I think that period, those sort of first 6 months or so, you were already quite conscious of how he was developing, and you were, by virtue of the fact that you were off with him and you were going to the classes, you had a comparator as well.
Yeah.
You were seeing the other parents and the other children of a similar age. And I didn't have that. I had a little bit of it, I suppose, but for those first 6 months, I didn't really, because I was coming back from work and then seeing you both, and my experience was reflected through you. And so I was really trying to sort of, my main focus was, can I reduce your anxiety? And so I think I tended to, in a way that in hindsight wasn't always helpful, try and dismiss and sort of smooth over and just be like, it'll be fine. They all develop differently. Like, let's focus on the day to day. And that was probably a kind of, to you, very frustrating thing. But it was my thought process was always, let's reduce the anxiety. Let's just sort of try and work through a difficult patch.
I think looking back, that was a real friction point between your probable autism and my probable ADHD, because I think it was when I became a parent that I suddenly saw a lot of the quite classic ADHD symptoms, because I was very overwhelmed. And it was, when I'd be at baby classes and things, I felt very different to the other mums. And looking back, it's like, it's because I probably have ADHD, whereas they're perhaps neurotypical. But I think that's an example of where there was maybe a difference in how we wanted to deal with it, just because our brains work quite differently. Okay, so let's skip forward to how you've reflected on your own potential neurodivergence and how our son's journey within that has kind of led to that reflection.
When I kind of came around to probably being, I guess, alert to, I suppose, or the kind of potential signifiers of maybe some of this, you then start to think about how it kind of might manifest in your own life. And certainly with our son, he was, you mentioned sensory processing disorder. It was stuff like busy environments, bright environments, the classic things like the hand dryer in the toilets, that kind of thing, noise, like the early signifiers were that. And then stuff around social interaction, stuff around the rigidity of school and the expectations of school and his response to that and his response to the demands that are placed on you by those structures and the expectations of them. And then you start to see kind of patterns of behavior. And for him, it kind of would build to a point where it put him into kind of fight or flight response over things that might appear quite minor, but it's a bit like, it's sort of, kid buckaroo. It's like you pile stuff on them and then like the little thing, the lasso that you put on at the end is the thing that flips everything. And it might seem like an overreaction to a particular thing, but actually it's the sum of the pieces. It's not just that one. And you then start to think, well, so the school they've got kind of techniques that they kind of try and deal with that stuff in kind of a mainstream setting. They try and kind of give the kids little jobs. They kind of give them opportunities to go off and do something else, to take them out of the classroom for a while. And I started thinking, I remember being given little jobs, and I remember sitting in the little like shared space between the classrooms where all the books were in the little library, and I remember doing this and that, and thinking, I thought it was because I was really special.
You are.
Oh, but I am, yeah. But then I was really clever. I was cleverer than everyone else. That was why I was getting, like, I'd finished all the work and I got, but actually I always asked questions, and I always, and I remember one kind of parents' evening. I was probably only kind of 6 or 7 at that. I was very similar to our son's age. But the teacher saying, I would sit there with this judgmental look on my face, and that she said it's almost like he's sussing everything out, and then he'll be part of it. And I think that's sort of always been my kind of I've always felt slightly outside of it, and I've always felt I definitely remember at school feeling like the teachers were my peers, not the pupils, and that I didn't have any problem with kind of pushing back against them or kind of trying to have kind of put my point across. And actually, I think I probably was, as a result, disruptive, not in a kind of particularly difficult way, but in a way that they probably did manage. And that was from kind of primary school age. And then again, like certainly, and I always felt like, for quite kind of academically okay, I could kind of do things. I was sort of curious enough and smart enough that I kind of could get through on that, but I never really fit together with the way in which traditional schooling was working. Particularly, this was in the kind of 90s. By the time I got to secondary school, I think I had that experience that, again, probably lots of neurodivergent people have, where they get to a point where their kind of natural aptitude starts to not be enough anymore. And so I think I probably have elements of both autism and ADHD, and the way in which I always dealt with it was focus myself with urgency, focus myself with that. I will hyperfixate on something that I find interesting. If there's something else that I need to be doing, I need the urgency. I can't just go through my list of tasks. I need it to be urgent. And you can do that to a point, but for me it was around kind of 14, 15 going into GCSE where I couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And I started to drop off, and I found myself being, my entire identity was built around being the smartest kid in the class. And I was that until I started dropping back into the pack, and then I lost all of it. And then by the time I got to sixth form, I definitely had just fallen out of the swing of it, and was really, really struggling.
Do you think you were burnt out?
I think that was exactly it. Again, in hindsight,
because you masked quite a lot, and so I wonder if at school you'd really masked, and then it just got to the point where you could not do that anymore.
It was very insular, and I think struggled with like depression-like symptoms, and for kind of got to the end of sixth form, but kind of with fairly, not dire, but not brilliant set of A-level results that kind of shut a lot of doors at that point, and ended up with 6 months of just sat at home, kind of regrouping. And I think, again, in hindsight, I was recovering from burnout that had been all through my schooling, had been developing. And then particularly, I had forced myself through probably 3 or 4 years of being kind of really struggling with it to get to the end.
Yeah.
And then had to kind of regroup a bit. And it probably took me until into my 20s before I started to properly come out the other side of it and kind of get a grip of who I was again.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think becoming a teenager and going through puberty and then being aware of more of the social interactions with other people, do you think that added to the strain is that why it became more of a struggle when you got to your GCSEs?
That's probably part of it. I think, there's that added element, is there, of how, I think as a teenager, you're sort of, your natural thing is that you're finding your identity of who you are, and you're trying to work out what, like, your kind of, what you are going to be, and what you're kind of, how you're going to align yourself. And there's tribes, and there's sort of kind of groups and all the rest of it. And I never really identified with any of them. Certainly not like within school, and I never felt completely at home, as you said. I think I probably was masking quite a lot. So I think there was that sort of sense of feeling a bit lost there, and feeling a bit kind of disconnected, and you're dealing with a lot of different people. I don't think you ever deal with more people than you would do at like secondary school, where there's kind of, my school, there were probably a couple of hundred in the year group, and it was a lot of people who you interacted with on a daily basis, and you had to have some form of like sort of social relationship with them. And so it was like, who am I today, and what am I presenting today, and how do I kind of connect with that? And I think that is such a big element of it.
It's interesting how, like, as kids, we're in our own little world, and then whether you're ADHD or autistic or neurotypical, when you become a teenager, it gets more complicated anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think it's important to put it in context of this. This was the 90s or early 2000s when we were all in secondary school. And Heywood, I know you've spoken before about, you got your ADHD diagnosis at 6 because you were basically just like, oh, there's this naughty little boy, what's going on? Whereas I wonder, Arlen, if you flew under the radar because you could mask and because, you got your work done and all of that, but actually you were really struggling. And at the time, there wasn't the recognition that could also be a neurodivergent experience. It felt to me that any conversations around ADHD were, oh, it's naughty boys. And any conversations around autism were non-verbal children who were not in a mainstream setting. Yeah. And I think at the time, there just didn't seem to be any nuance, any in between, and so I wonder, not only as parents, but as people who are now in our late 30s, early 40s in 2025, there's a lot of hindsight, isn't there? And you'd think if that was now, you would hope that you would have got support and that, there would have been some avenues there for you to see what worked best for you. But you were a square peg trying to be put into a round hole when it came to your A levels. It sounded like that the setup just wasn't working for you.
Yeah, I distinctly remember having a conversation with someone who was in a similar boat to me, I guess, and being really frustrated that the school were only interested in the ones who were causing trouble or who were going to get the best grades. And it felt like everybody else.
You've got one of each here.
Yeah. One of each end. Yeah, it was, the ones who might burn the building down and the ones who might go to Oxbridge.
Build the building back.
Yeah. And that was, and I remember thinking, I'm in the middle and I don't get any attention. And I was sort of desperate for that validation. and I didn't get it anywhere.
I think
and
also because you've got a really acute sense of justice. So I can imagine teenage you being like, hang on, this is not fair. And maybe that also came even earlier when you were talking about, oh, well, I'm cleverer than the other kids here, and so I'm just going to hang out with the teachers. Do you think that came from that sense of justice? Like, this isn't fair to me. I'm not being treated like the grown-up I really am.
Yeah, I mean, like, a misguided sense of justice as well. I don't want everyone to think that again, like, in hindsight. But it sort of, I think that probably was part of it, that you get a sense of where you feel like you ought to be, where you feel like you ought to sit, and what you kind of want. And I know that, I mean, this is sort of part of the kind of issue with schools generally, but it's like, not every child can have all the attention all the time, but every child would like more attention and deserves more attention. And I think that's the thing, really, is that I thrive off, and still do, positive feedback, positive responses, this feeling that I'm kind of, and that reassurance that I'm doing okay. And I think as you get older, you find that in other ways, or you're able to sort of self-produce some of that validation. But I was always after it as a child, and it wasn't always there. Yeah. And I think that's sometimes you find that with and certainly with our son, like you might get kind of difficult behavior, and usually it's sort of sensory seeking, isn't it? Stimuli seeking behavior, and it's
like jumping off things, especially.
Or like coming and climbing on you, or whatever, trying to get a reaction, or trying to get that like response. And my version of that was I want you to write a nice note on my piece of work that I've just done. And I still like that. I still like it when I do something and someone writes me a nice email. It's good. But that's and it's dopamine, isn't it?
Yeah. Heywood, how does that contrast with what your experience was like as a teenager?
I mean, I was diagnosed very young, but it was kind of forgotten about. So, like, by the time I was a teenager, the ADHD wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I just knew that, like, similar to you, Arlen, when I became a teenager, I really struggled to get the grades. I kind of winged it up until then. I could get away with it, but then having to do, like, we were pushed to do like 9, 10 GCSEs, but I was only interested in 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah.
So I only did good at 3 or 4 of them because I could absorb it in the classroom.
What about socially?
But socially, I thrived. Like, that's what I enjoyed about school, because I had my friends. I became very peer orientated. So I put a lot of value in being the popular kid. I also, in hindsight, looking back, it wasn't just that I valued it. That was my coping. Like, because I was so painfully insecure, actually, that if I could make people laugh, if I could be friends with all the boys and I had all the girls fancying me, then I would be in a safe place.
Yeah.
Because then everyone's on my side. But any criticism or anyone that didn't like me, which happened, right? It would like tear me apart. But I had I had to build up that self-esteem much later on in life.
And
it's
so interesting
I
that
struggled with that.
Self-esteem seems to be a common thread.
I think it makes sense, right? Because for years and years and years, you're kind of being misplaced and misjudged, and you're labeled as this and labeled as that. I was getting told off countless times a day for disrupting the class or not doing this, or by everyone, like teachers and parents. And I guess it just kind of, it gets to you after a while. Your psyche kind of takes a battering, but then your friends think you're awesome, so it's like, okay, I'll concentrate on that.
You get that validation from them.
But then when I became a teenager, I discovered alcohol, and that was like my fuel, because then I could be sociable with everybody, like even people that I didn't know. Because I couldn't do that otherwise. I couldn't speak to people I didn't know because I was too insecure. Really. And then the alcohol journey began. But school was a shit show, really. Like, I liked going to school, but I couldn't get the grades. I kept being disruptive. I got expelled at 15, then went into another school and just kind of scrambled to get through.
It's interesting that you talk about expulsions, because this is something that you've been working on. I think because of our own experience with our son first being suspended from school just after he turned 5, and there's been multiple suspensions since. He's now in a specialist setting, and we're really optimistic. We hope that that's going to really work out for him. They seem to get him. But that's become a real area of interest for you, hasn't it? Is SEN kids, and particularly what they call fixed-term exclusions, which is suspensions. Do you want to talk about that and how that became something that you've done quite a deep dive into?
Yeah, well, when it first happened with our son, they say just turned 5, and it came as a bit of a shock that was a thing that was being used, that the schools were suspending children that young, and so I had we were dealing with our situation and kind of what that would turn into, but then I was also like, well, how kind of common is this? What's going on? And so yeah, I kind of looked into it, and the sort of the first thing to say is that the use of suspensions, fixed term exclusions, and then permanent exclusions is on the up, has been for a number of years, was before the pandemic, but has really kind of jumped up since the pandemic. And it's being used, I think, I think it's a symptom of schools being unable to cope with the needs of children. Because when you look at the numbers, around 80% of suspensions that happen at primary age are of children with recognised special educational needs. So they're either in receipt of some additional support that the school are providing, or they have what's called a education and healthcare plan, which is the more formal document that kind of explains the needs.
Which are very hard to get, by the way.
Which are hard to get.
Really hard to get.
And to get any sort of recognition of SEN is quite difficult. And so so 80% of those suspensions are going to kids who are recognised. There'll be more who aren't. But those kids make up around 15% of the school population. They're getting around 80% of the suspensions. And these are going right back to like reception age. So kids who are kind of 4 or 5 are being suspended.
Didn't you even find in the research when even some children in school nurseries being suspended?
Yeah. And it's the most common. So more than half of suspensions are for persistent disruptive behaviour. So that is kids that are struggling in the environment, isn't it? That's not one instant that's so bad that something's happened. It's kids who are difficult,
especially when they're that young.
Especially when they're that young, because it's them communicating an issue at that age. And what's interesting is you go back, and so I in my day job I do research, I do writing, I do kind of policy focused projects and bits of work with organisations, kind of exploring issues like this. And so I did it for myself, and so I freedom of information the Northeast local authorities and got them to send me their data split by age, split by school year, and in several cases split by school within a local authority area as well, and looked at how the suspensions were being used. And you can see the younger kids are, the more likely it is that they will have that the suspensions are being given to SEN kids. So across the board, it's around 80%. When you get down to years, reception, year 1, year 2, it's about 90%. So suspensions are being used for kids with special educational needs. That's what they're using them for. And they're using it to kind of either give the teachers a break, possibly to give the kids a break.
Yeah.
But it's clearly a symptom of a system that is not successfully managing an issue, and it's an escalating issue because you can see the overall numbers going up. I have been quite vocal about this. I write a newsletter called War Room that comes out weekly. I dedicated several editions of that to this as an issue, and I get back whenever I write about it lots of responses from other parents who have been through similar things that we have, where you're dealing with the system, you're kind of juggling with work and you're juggling with life and you're trying to negotiate through this. And the thing is, it's so hidden.
Yeah.
Because people deal with this stuff on the quiet. There's a stigma attached to suspension and exclusion, and you don't necessarily talk about it. Like our experience was shocked and surprised that it was happening at that age, and you talk to other people and they were shocked and surprised that it was happening, other kind of parents on the playground. And the reality of it is it's a huge burden on people, because you are you're not only negotiating through the system as you're trying to receive additional support. So you're speaking to all these different agencies. You're speaking to the NHS because you're speaking to child and adolescent mental health services, maybe trying to get a diagnosis or get some extra support. You're speaking to educational psychologists and occupational therapists, and you're speaking to the kind of council team that are kind of running this stuff. You've got all these different things going on. You're speaking to the school. And then you're getting kind of the feedback from the school around what's going on. In our case, you kind of find out probably quite late in the day that the next day your son is off. So we'd be getting to 6:30 on an evening and being called by the head teacher.
What would parents do? Have got work commitments?
This is exactly.
They just have to take time off work, like on the
I mean, for us, we were lucky in a way that Arlen is self-employed, so he has that flexibility. But obviously, when you don't work, you don't get paid. You know, you can't do that work and you can't invoice it. So it has a huge financial effect on us. And particularly if you're a parent who, you've got to go to work. You know, if you are working outside the home, maybe you're doing shift work. Like, how are you meant to find childcare?
It's just impossible.
And you get a letter when your child gets this suspension saying they're not allowed to be in a public place during school hours, so you do have to keep them at home. So it's really, really difficult.
That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
One of the things I did as part of my research was ask parents to give me their kind of responses, because I was getting so many people coming back saying, we've been through this, we've been through that, like what their kind of experience of it was. And I ended up with about 12 parents that gave me in quite a lot of detail what it was that had happened with them. And there were so many who people lost jobs, people ended up selling their homes because they needed to save money, or they needed to access cash to access private professionals because they were waiting so long. Kids who were older than our son, but maybe in the sort of teenagers, who were kind of driven into real mental health crisis by the lack of support. Just really difficult situations and really frustrating situations, and an almost constant kind of story of feeling kind of sort of helpless and overwhelmed by it, and really, really struggling to understand why it was so difficult to get something out of the system that seemed so obvious.
And a sense of shame if your child's been suspended, a sense of shame. And I think this is what frustrates me so much about the narrative that you often see, particularly in some parts of the media, where our parents are seeking an autism and ADHD assessment for their kid so that their kid can get ahead. And that is the opposite of true, because if your child is struggling with additional needs, chances are they're being suspended. It affects your work. It affects your whole family economically. Like you lose money, like you said, the examples of people who've lost jobs, who've lost houses. Why would you choose that?
Yeah, and it's an additional strain as a parent when your child has additional needs. Just on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute.
It's like school holidays. Our son cannot be in activities or summer camps or anything like that. He will not cope. And there isn't really any provision for children with additional needs in the school holidays. And so one of us, usually you, has to take that period off work. And again, that's a period where you're not earning. So it has a massive economic impact. And it just seems like it seems mad. It seems mad. You know, it's not helping the child. It's not helping the school. It's not helping the family. But I think in a lot of cases, schools are desperate, and it's like, well, we have to do this. This is our policy, or we have to show to the local authority we're struggling so much we're having to suspend this child.
Yeah, and one of the things to sort of highlight is the demand for support has gone up. I think by virtue of a few different things. So one is post-COVID. I think there are more young people dealing with more complex needs. I think there's a lot of trauma. I think there's a lot of particularly the kind of social kind of relationship stuff. There's a lot of kids who are having to get used to school later because of missing schooling in the traditional setting. So that I think has caused lots of problems that we are still dealing with as a society. But I think also just more awareness, as you sort of alluded to earlier, like compared to when we were kids, people are more aware, they're more alert, they're more kind of conscious of it. So demand has gone up. People are seeking diagnosis and are seeking support, and that's a positive thing because that's what people ought to do. So the number of the education healthcare plans, the HCPs, has gone up. The budgets have gone up by about half of that.
Yeah.
So the amount of financial support the local authorities have in order to provide for the needs that are there, it's not matched. It's not matched. So that is an issue, and schools are struggling. Schools, I think, in a lot of cases, are doing their best with limited resources and big classes. I think there are other schools that would rather not have these problems, and there's cultural shifts and changes.
I think we've had experience of both, haven't we?
Yeah, and I think it makes such a big difference in terms of navigating that system, because you're either doing it with the support of the school or you're doing it with resistance from the school.
Yeah,
and that again was something that kind of came through quite a lot in the responses I was getting from people. But it's worth, I think, putting this in context as well, that right at this moment, the government are looking to put through reforms of SEN support. And so kind of imminently there'll be a white paper that sets out how they're going to do that. They've not given a real indication of what's going to be in that. They've not done what you usually do in these scenarios and kind of trail various bits and see what response you get back. They've not really done that, other than to say they want mainstream schools to be more inclusive, and they've already put money towards additional kind of either additional resource units or kind of additional sort of elements within schools in a mainstream
What does
setting.
that look like? That looks like a mainstream school that has a sector for the children that are struggling.
So you get mainstream schools that are called additionally resourced provision. So they get extra funding, and it might be that they have a SEN class where it's a smaller class size, there's specialist staff in there, but that's within a mainstream school.
But at that point, would it not make sense just to have a whole school dedicated to young people that need the help?
Yeah, well, it's that's the kind of balancing act, because I think those exist, and that's where our son started this year, and they are, to me, feel like the ideal scenario, but they feel like what every education setting ought to be like. Small classes, kind of flexible, led by the children, kind of there's lots of support. The staff ratios are big, but they're expensive. So they're trying to find a halfway house, and what they seem to be doing is they want to make mainstream more inclusive. That doesn't always work. And the really troubling thing is they're talking about taking away the EHCPs, and the EHCPs are a legal document that sets out, these are my child's needs and this is how you will respond to them. So that it will say in it that you need an environment with kind of a smaller class size, or with
more patience.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah. But it will set out these are the things that we need, and it ought to be written in such a way that it's specific and it's measurable, and you can hold them to it, because it's a legal document that you can challenge in court. Yeah. You can say this, you are not providing this, and they're talking about taking that away. But
under what, like,
because it's expensive.
It's very expensive, because the local authority, if a child has an EHCP, the local authority has to show that they're meeting the needs outlined in the HCP.
Yeah. Surely it's expensive because it's on the rise, and surely it's on the rise because it's an increasing problem. So then to remove it, you're allowing the problem to flourish, right?
Yeah.
You're allowing it to just... Yeah. So what do they think is going to end up happening?
Well, there's so much uncertainty, and when it was suggested that they might remove HCPs, there was so much concern from parents of SEN kids, from people who are neurodivergent themselves. There was huge concern, and so I think the next few weeks, when they release more information, it's going to be critical for a lot of people. Especially if you are trying to get an EHCP for your child and you've not got one yet, and you might be thinking, hang on, if that's not going to be an option, what do I do now? So
they were talking about keeping them for pupils that are moved into specialist settings. But in my experience, and other people's experience might be different, but I think our scenario, the time when you'd need it would be in a mainstream school, because that's the one that's got to be making the adjustments. Actually, a specialist setting where they're more familiar with dealing with the sorts of challenges that
they'll be asking you already from the
they'll be looking to how they're going to deal with it, and it ought to be a kind of a bit more of a kind of collegiate process. But I think in a mainstream setting, you need those guidelines and those sort of controls over what's being provided, and I think it's really worrying. And I think the thing that at the moment feels really difficult is that parents throughout the process, it took us 2 years to get our EHCP, and we're still on the waiting list for CAMS.
And our case is quite extreme in terms of some of the behaviour that he exhibits, and the fact that when we were going through the HCP, the educational psychologist gave a report that said this child needs to be in a specialist setting. I think that's quite an extreme example. I think there's a huge number of neurodivergent kids who maybe could manage in mainstream, but with significant adjustments, and if those adjustments are not made, they won't come out with qualifications, and they won't be able to, kind of live their life to the fullest. So
they kind of get lost amongst the system, and it ends up can be detrimental to them, right? Like, I think wherever you are on the spectrum or in the neurodivergent sphere, we struggle in school, we struggle in systems, but then for those that have even more additional needs, if they get neglected, it's just going to make it worse. You end up with a very frustrated little human.
And very frustrated parents who feel like they're not being listened
100%.
to. And I think that's the thing with this process. It feels like the parents aren't listened to through dealing with negotiating the system as it stands, and it's not obvious how they're being listened to with how they're talking about reforming it. Because I don't think you'd find a single parent that said, "Oh yeah, the problem is the EHCP." They might say the problem is the process of getting one, but actually having that document that says these are my child's needs and this is how they're going to be met is it's like the holy grail.
It's life changing. It's been life changing for us.
And we're fair, like you say, our situation may have been towards the more extreme end with some of the behaviours, but we were among the lucky ones for the outcome we got, and for actually when we got to that point, we got across that final hurdle fairly easily. And we didn't have to go to appeal. We didn't have to challenge it. Lots of parents have to. And it's quite difficult, I think, to understand, how are we going to... You just cannot build a system that works for kids without talking to the people who know them best, and that's their parents.
And I feel like a lot of parents are becoming quite disillusioned with the system. And Bridget Phillipson, do you want to talk about the comments that she made about absence and sort of the response that evoked from a lot of parents, particularly parents of SEND children?
Well, one of the common things, I'm sure lots of people who end up listening to and watching this podcast will have experienced school refusal. So because you are putting your child into an environment where, like you said earlier, you're getting told off all the time and no one wants to do that.
Or it's sensory overload.
Or whatever it is. You get a lot of resistance and you get full refusal. And so you get attendance figures falling because kids just can't manage. So kids might be in burnout. They might be just avoiding a really traumatic situation. And end of August, just going into the new school year, there was a news story that was kind of across all the papers and online, that was Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, saying parents need to make sure that kids go to school the first week of term to set them up, because we know if kids miss a day in the first week, they miss more school later and they end up with poor attendance figures. And the implication of it was, well, there were two. One, that parents were the problem, weren't trying hard enough to get their kids into school, didn't care.
Like, oh, you don't fancy going to school today? Oh, that's fine, don't worry.
And 2, that it was missing a day in that first week was the thing that then meant that you didn't turn up afterwards. And what was missing from that whole conversation was, well, actually, probably the kids that miss a day in the first week are the kids who are really dealing with challenges, and those challenges clearly aren't being dealt with. The barriers, the needs aren't being met, and they're therefore missing days later. So it's a problem that's not being fixed. So what you're seeing is throughout the school year then, those things that manifest in the first week continuing to manifest, and the kids then struggling to go into school on a kind of regular basis. And it then does become a big thing. It becomes really difficult. And I think it was so frustrating to see that, because it one set schools versus parents and the government versus parents, which isn't helpful. And it also misunderstood the situation. And I saw immediate reaction from lots of SEND parents who were dealing with school refusal. And you all you want as a parent, particularly as a neurodivergent parent yourself, all you want is routine and regularity and stability, and that knowledge that your child is going somewhere where they're going to be safe and they're going to be happy and they're going to be there till 3:00. and you, that's what you want. And so you're not getting it, then you can't plan the rest of your day and you can't do everything else, and you're waiting for that phone call, and that no parent wants to be in that situation.
No, and the huge effort that you often have to put into to get your child to school. You know, and if you have a neurodivergent child, they may have a really high level of need, so they might need help getting dressed, eating breakfast, all of that. Like, it all takes so much longer. And it's so much more difficult.
And have you experienced that they're quite stringent with when they arrive at school? Like, do you lose points essentially if they're late?
When our son was in the 2 different mainstream settings, yes. The school he's in now, which is a specialist setting, they understand that a lot of the kids' school refusal come into it. So they are a bit more relaxed. They do say, try and get them there for 9. I think for the 2 of us, because we were quite sort of teachers' pets at school, it was, oh no, we've got to get him to school and we've got to get him there. And so we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do that. And we will often, when we see other parents that we know on social media who are taking term time holidays, we laugh at ourselves and we get really frustrated. Like, those bastards are at Eurocamp in Portugal, and we're like struggling, like having to fight with our child to get him in his uniform and get him to school every morning, and then he gets suspended so he can't go to school anyway, and they face no consequences. And I'm not suggesting that parents should take, should or shouldn't take holiday during term time, but I think a lot of the narrative is that's what parents are doing, is like, oh, the kid just doesn't fancy going to school, so don't worry, or oh, we'll do a day trip instead. And it's not recognizing the really hard work and the emotional distress.
No, and the fact that the added fact that there's consequences, I just can't believe that that's still a thing.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about homeschooling?
Yeah,
because you homeschool your daughter. Talk us through what was behind that as a decision for you and Briggy.
Yes. So there's lots of different elements to it. I think when me and Briggy started talking about Bella and schooling, it started from a place of our experiences going to school and how we struggled with school. So I struggled a lot with school when I had subjects that I wasn't interested in, got in trouble with some of the teachers, scared from some of the teachers. I had a lot of social anxiety with a lot of aspects of school. Even though I thrived as like the popular kid, I had anxieties at the same time. Briggy got horrendously bullied later on as a teenager in school. And she found that in the last years of school, she actually only went, but she says like about 30% of the time, she spent most of the time with her grandmother. So she was like trying to escape it. And the whole school experience for her was quite traumatic. And the elements of it for me were as well. So putting all of that into account, when we were talking about schooling for Bella, we were already coming in with a bit of a bias and a bit of a bad taste for the school system. But at the same time, I appreciate that that was our experience, not necessarily going to be hers, and that schools might have changed since then. But then when we started looking into it a little bit deeper and we started talking about what our values as parents are raising a child and what those values were, and how other ways of raising a child can be, we started coming to the realization that actually, for us, we felt that Bella would have a better experience growing up as a kid into a teenager if we raised her ourselves. And it wasn't so much the education side of things, it was more the experience of who she's spending her days with and who her main adults are.
Mm-hmm.
I find the conversation a little bit difficult because I don't ever want other parents to think that there's a judgment, because it's not about that. It's just what we felt would be best for our kid,
That's
which is what everyone,
for you.
yeah, and everyone should stand by that kind of
well,
thing.
I think, you know, we obviously, when Kit was being suspended and all of that, we thought, oh, well, should we homeschool? And I think we really thought about it long and hard on several occasions. But for us, it just didn't feel like it's something that would work for us. I think because he has such specific needs and he needs specialists who are trained, who know how to engage a child in learning in a way that suits those needs. And neither of us are education professionals. I felt like we just weren't equipped to do that. I think also for me, because of my probable ADHD, I find parenting very overwhelming. I love it. Obviously, I love my children to bits and it's a lot of fun. But I think that constant overstimulation, especially from our eldest, because he will repeat the same phrases again and again. He's very loud. I need a break.
Yeah.
I need a break. And for me, work is a really important part of my identity, always has been. And so being able to have that time when he's at school, I can dedicate to work, that you can dedicate to work as well, is really important. So for us, I think homeschooling it's something we considered, but it's not quite right for us. And I think that's the thing, is you've got to make the decision that's best for you and your family. That's what's best for you guys. And
yeah, and it doesn't come with its own like struggles or caveats. I don't know what the right word is, but you know, Briggy, she's with Bella 5 days of the week, and like it's hard, like it's really difficult, and like as of yet, we haven't seen any neurodivergence in Bella. Whether that comes later or not, I don't know. But so she hasn't got that additional challenge as parents raising her, right? And it's hard. And like, you know, Briggy's ADHD, autistic, so that adds, obviously. But yeah, like, I think it will be 2-3 times a month, I can tell like she's burnt out and I need to kind of step in where possible. And there's days where we're both like, fuck, neither of us have got this.
yeah,
You know, and it's like, and there's sacrifices you make with homeschooling as well. Like, obviously, there's a financial burden, which is very real.
Yeah.
You have very little time to yourself. And so it's like, at the same time, I don't complain, right? This was like our choice.
But I think it's really interesting to hear about the decisions different families make and why certain things work for them. And I think that's what I want to encourage us to do more of as like a parenting community, is have those conversations with curiosity.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about, hey, why did you guys decide to homeschool? I know that it's not something that's going to work for me and my family, but I'm really interested into how it works for you guys. And I think having that conversation can be such a source of solidarity.
100%. I think it's really important as well, because there'll be other parents that, you know, homeschooling is not the right choice for them or for their child. And there'll be other parents where it's like, actually, that fits more aligned with how things could be.
Yeah.
But if we're not having the conversations, the options aren't available to people.
Can we compare settings? Because one of the things that was really interesting about, we went and visited we visited a additionally resource provision school.
Yeah.
We visited a specialist saying, I hadn't had any exposure to that and what it looked like before we did that.
No, nor had I.
And And the same with homeschooling. I think chatting to you guys was probably the first real in-depth kind of view I got, like as a parent, of what that looks like. What does a week look like for you? And so
the reason why I was smirking is because every morning we overlook a pathway where lots of parents are walking their kids to school. And like often at that point, Bella's watching TV, and I tell Briggy, I'm like, we have to be grateful sometimes that we don't have to do the morning run, because our mornings are generally quite, and I'm not like boasting about this. It comes from a place of gratitude. Like our mornings are chill, especially when it's just me and Bella, because I'm like, if we don't have anything to do today, like we'll leave the house at midday if needed. But the average week, so I won't remember it day by day, but Bella generally has 1 or 2 classes a day that we'll take her to. So whether that's an art class or a drama class, like with Kit at ActCam, or she started doing French and Spanish. So we'll get up, she'll usually watch TV for an hour, maybe 2, and then I'll hang out with her a little bit, then I'll come to work. And Briggy and Bella, they probably leave around 11 o'clock to go to their first class. And then she'll have lots of friends that are in the home ed community. Majority
and all
of
different ages as well,
lots of
which
different
is really
ages.
nice.
The majority of neurodivergent. You get a lot of kids that have come out of the schools and gone into home education. I mean, for obvious reasons, right? And then it's a case of like a playground or a museum or, whatever's happening at that time. Sometimes, some days it will be very like at home focused. And then it's just a lot of like independent playing, doing arts and crafts, that sort of stuff. She's got like, in terms of home education, actual home education, it's a lot of reading. She's got games on the computer, which are education based. So she's been learning like maths recently. But she leads the way. So we'll be like, oh, this is here. These games are here. And then she'll try them out. And if she likes them, she'll continue and she'll come back to them. So yeah, I mean, that's how it goes, really. Having a lot of like home ed classes really helps.
Yeah.
Because you can feel quite isolated thinking, there's a lot of self-doubt, like, shit, are we doing the right thing? Like, what are we doing? And I feel part of the conditioning of growing up in our generations is thinking like, shit, my child needs to get a school education, get the GCSEs, the A-levels, the degree to get a good job, to be happy in life. And a lot of the homeschooling for me with Bella is rewiring that actually she doesn't have to go through that system to then, if she wants to be a physicist at 16, she can still study to get the GCSEs, the A-levels and the degree at 16. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's that sort of awareness of what it looks like. And I think what's really interesting is the fact that there is a community there, and you do see, I think probably more so than you used to, you see places that have like a home education afternoon where like
there's definitely a lot more of that. I think it's also it's because of where we live as well. I think there's a lot of families locally who homeschool, and it's
definitely on the up as well. After COVID and lockdown, I think a lot of parents realized that actually they could home ed and that was an option. But it's funny, within the home ed community, there's lots of like branches of how people do it. So we've got some good friends, they've got 3 kids, and they follow more of a structured approach. So they do classes and they will have lessons and they'll be teaching them. And and that's awesome. That's great. Me and Briggy, we'll buy like a little chemistry set, but it's play, right? I mean, Bella's 6. And if she shows more interest in something that we're not adapted to do, we'll find a class that can do that for her within our means, time and financially, really. But it's a lot more flexible and like, the trick for us is always exposing her to what's there. And then if she's interested, she can try it. And then if she's not, she doesn't have to. And it's been difficult to stay true to that, because sometimes she'll do something, really enjoy it. She'll have one bad experience and then she wants to stop doing it. And it's like, shit, and we're not going to force her to do it. But then 6 months later, she's like, oh, what happened to da-da-da? It's like, oh, well, it's still there if you want. And then she goes back to
Pick it back up.
But it's difficult. Like, you've got an internal kind of battle sometimes with, like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
But
it's interesting, again, you're talking about it being kind of led by her, because that's something I think the specialist setting our sons in has got that, where they will take it day by day, I think, with the kids that are there. So he's in a class of about 8. They've got at least 2 adults in the room at all times. The space is quite a big classroom. It's quite well lit with natural light. Different setups within it. So they've got traditional kind of tables you could sit and work at, but then they've got little spaces where there's Lego and there's sand, and then they've got some computers, and then they've got a kind of imagination play area where they kind of change it up, and it can be a cafe or a vet, or it's a construction site at the moment. So they've got all these different things.
So nice.
And the idea is that, they kind of sort of, they go with the ebb and flow. So they've got an idea of what they want to be doing that day with the kids, but they'll have a couple of jobs that they want them to do, like sit and do a couple of worksheets or whatever, or work through a particular thing. But they will kind of move with them. So if they want to be doing something else, they'll do it. And it's all short bursts of things. It's not being sat there kind of really focused. They've then got like breakaway spaces. So if a kid gets overwhelmed in the classroom, there's first of all, there's like safe spaces in the corridor where they can go and sit, and then they've got a sensory room. They've got what they call a Zen den that's got like a kind of teepee thing and a big bean bag and a trampoline you can bounce on. They've got all these different things. Then they've got outside space as well, and there's enough adults around. They've got kind of floating support in the corridors and the hallways and things, where if someone does need to leave the classroom for a little while to kind of, if they become dysregulated, there's someone with them at all times.
So nice.
And it's just a more responsive environment, and the kind of it's interesting. Like, we get phone calls at the end of the day to sort of tell us what's gone on. Occasionally there will be an incident where they kind of give you an update,
and we tense up. Because we had 2 years of conditioning of being like, oh my God, he's going to get suspended again.
But I get the same story. I answer the phone, I get the same story, and they go, "It's just one of those things. Everybody's fine. This is how we dealt with it." And he was back in the classroom 20 minutes later. Yeah, no problem.
Because that's a specialist setting for kids with very similar challenges. Yeah. They'll all be having a meltdown at some point. They know the staff know exactly what to do.
Well, you do get the feeling that you're like, oh, you were the 5th phone call out of 8 that day. Yeah. Like they're getting you off the phone to take the phone the next set.
But they just roll with it. They're like, it's fine. We're learning kind of what the triggers are for maybe overwhelm and all of that. And it's not framed as, look what your kid's done now. Yes, instead it's, he had this response. So here's what we did to try and unpack that with him, and here's what we've learned, and here's what we're going to do next time. And as a parent, that's really helpful as well, because that gives us some tools to implement at home with them as well.
And that's the thing, is about trying to build something that kind of is a partnership where you're working with them, and you're consistent across the board of like how you're dealing with things and the information they're giving you, because you don't see your child in that situation. And it's difficult because you as a parent might be able to spot something happening. And so on a Saturday or a Sunday, if he's with us and he's starting to become dysregulated, you see it and you stop it. You move him out of that scenario if he needs to be somewhere else. In a mainstream school setting, they would never spot it ahead of time, even with a one-to-one support.
Because there's 30 kids.
Because there's 30 kids. And that's how you end up with so many kids. I mean, I was just talking about them having the corridor space at the specialist school, but there's so many kids who become corridor kids where they're taken out of the classroom and they're taught, or they're just kept for the day just in the corridor outside the classroom.
And they're not learning. They're not kind of engaging with maybe some of the social tools that might help them through that.
Yeah. And they're being outcasted as well.
And they're being outcast, and they realise that they're being othered, and they realise that they're separate from everyone else, and it is traumatic and it is difficult. And the thing that's most frustrating about it is that at that age, behaviour is communication, isn't it? They don't necessarily have the words, as an adult sometimes does, to talk about how they're feeling and like reflect and recognize what it is that's going on. So they just
Imagine how confusing it is to feel a meltdown coming on, not sure why you're being triggered by certain things as like a small person, and then being taken out of the classroom and being told like, oh, you need to do this or you need to do that.
Yeah.
Like what a head fuck that must be.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I would find if I was in a classroom of 30 people,
It's overwhelming off the bat, right?
I was trying to get on with some work, I'd find it really difficult. I wouldn't be able to do it. So I think it's not surprising that
Jodie, I never thought of that.
As more and more pressure is being put on schools, as classroom sizes are bigger, as their buildings are bursting at the seams, I think it's no surprise that more and more children are finding it.
It's a funny one how like the ADHD, I'm talking about personal experience, like as an ADHD boy, I was always being told that I'm distracting others in class, right? When actually I'm being distracted by everything on a much higher level than like a neurotypical, say, person might have. Because I can't filter out all the sounds and the whispers and the scribbling of the pencils and something outside the window. It's not that I want to,
loud,
you know?
Yeah. We've been recording for a while, so we should probably wrap things up. And I like sort of bringing some quite funny anecdotes to these because it's not all doom and gloom. Sometimes it's quite hilarious parenting a neurodivergent child or being a neurodivergent parent yourself. And I was thinking about, the last few weeks we've been settling our son into this specialist setting. And I picked him up one day last week and he was saying, this kid in my class is so naughty. This kid in my class is so naughty, and just kept going on about this kid. Oh, he's so naughty. You wouldn't believe what he's done now. Thinking, mate, how do you think you ended up in that school? Why do you think you're all there? It was so funny to me that he has really lashed out so many times and been suspended from school. Is like, check out that guy.
It's funny because like he again a common thing, he gets hyperfixated on stuff. Current hyperfixation is Star Wars,
but specifically Lego Star Wars, not the actual Star Wars, because that's boring.
Loves Lego Star Wars, loves everything. Lots of questions around it, and all the rest of it. But that's led to us playing Star Wars music in the car. So we'll be going around and we'll be playing kind of the Star Wars soundtrack, or we'll be kind of maybe playing an audiobook of kind of Star Wars stories. The first day at the new school, we'd kind of got him all ready, got him sorted, got him in the car. It's about a kind of 10-15 minute drive. We're on the way over and he asks for Star Wars music, just put some on, playing the main kind of theme that everyone's heard. And then he goes, no, I want the Darth Vader music. So flicking through it to find the Darth Vader music, and we're pulling into the car park of the new school going, dun, 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 dun. And I was thinking, this is so apt. And then kind of it's really like, it's really quiet, like it's completely different to a mainstream school where there's hundreds of kids. You're arriving in the car park, there's taxis dropping off kids because they're coming from all over the place to this specialist school. He's met on the gate and he's kind of taken in. And I get back in the car and I'm watching him kind of cross the yard, and they've closed the gate behind him and he's going in. As I get back in the car, I press the ignition and the music comes back on again. Duh, 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 and he's going in the door. I'm like, okay, right, well, off I go. It's just the perfect soundtrack to that moment.
Perfect. Nice. Is there anything else that you wanted to highlight about your research, or where can people find you to find out more about the research that you're doing on this?
So you can find my newsletter on Substack. So that's warroom.substack.com. So that's warroom, WOR.
Why is it called that, Arlen?
Because it's Geordie. It's Geordie, our room.
Because you're so deeply Geordie
I'm
yourself.
Deeply Geordie. I'm deeply Geordie. But yeah, so like, War Room in the kind of political kind of strategy sense. And then,
it is really good. It is really good for anyone who's interested in SEN issues or just general like statistics. There's a lot about education. There's a lot about families in there. It's a good weekly read.
It comes out every Wednesday morning, and I try and kind of summarize like latest data and research and politics and policy news and things
sometimes
that are relevant
some of your
to the Northeast.
Short stories were included
and
in
sometimes
there as well.
Sometimes I do some sort of self-promotion as well, so bits and pieces that I've done myself. So you'll find me on there, and people can find me on LinkedIn as well, and that's more or less the only places I am these days.
You need to give your full name for LinkedIn.
My name is Arlen Pettitt. That's Pettitt. Thanks, everyone. Like and subscribe.
Put the description, links in the description below.
Yeah.
Down here.
Brill, that's great. Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
And that's it for this week's conversation on parenting off script. Thank you so much for joining us and for being part of this community. I hope today's episode offered you a moment of recognition, a practical tip, or even just a little bit of comfort. If you enjoyed this episode, please do 2 things for us. Hit that subscribe or follow button on whatever app you're listening on right now, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or elsewhere. This is the best way to make sure you never miss a new episode. Come and join the conversation online. Find us on your usual social media platforms by searching for Parenting Off Script. We'd love hearing your experiences, your questions, and what you'd like to cover next. Sharing this podcast with another SEND parent you know is also the highest compliment you can pay us. So thank you in advance for helping our community grow. Until next time, keep trusting your gut, keep advocating, and keep parenting off script.